Welcome to the Irish NFL Show's Divisional Round recap in association with QuinnBet. And good evening to everyone joining us on Instagram, YouTube, Twitch, X, and on our own website, www.irishnflshow.com. We're approaching the crossroads that is Conference Championship weekend, the Super Bowl semi-finals, if you will. For the winners, it's Bourbon Street. They're on to Super Bowl 59 in New Orleans. For the losers, it's the Boulevard of Broken Dreams. And unlike the Green Day song, that's not a lonely road. Sadly, there's plenty of company. The Lions, Ravens, Texans, and Rams joined the other teams eliminated from the playoffs as they all fell at the divisional round hurdle. We'll talk about the victors and we'll talk about the vanquished. And we'll start looking ahead to the NFL's Final Four this weekend over the next hour. If you're listening back to the podcast rather than watching or listening live, then welcome to you too. And please like, share, or subscribe even wherever you're listening. Right, we'll break down the divisional round with the opening game from Saturday night shortly. But first, we go to some breaking news, which, Noel, concerns you and I. Not that we want to make it a Bears show, because we got much better teams to talk about. But it looks like, according to two NFL insiders now, Tom Pelissero of NFL and Adam Schefter of ESPN, the Bears have signed Ben Johnson, former offensive coordinator of the Detroit Lions, and I suppose current offensive coordinator of the Detroit Lions until it's otherwise confirmed, as their head coach. Your first reaction to that?
Yeah, I'm shocked they got it done so quickly, to be honest. I mean, we've obviously talked about this Bears coaching search now for a few weeks, and I wasn't too happy with it. I wasn't impressed. It felt like they were bringing so many people in. You were wondering, did they really have a plan or what was going on? But then obviously we see the Lions go out the playoffs, and straight away Ben Johnson looks like he's got that job. So who knows what the Bears were doing? Maybe it's a bit of a smokescreen in the background. They knew who they wanted. They've gone and got him. And for me, look, I always worry about the hot offensive coordinator coming in as the head coach. There's always a lot of questions. How are they going to take that step up from being that guy to being the main guy? Who are they going to bring in terms of staff? Who do they know that they can bring in? Because we know obviously head coaches with experience come in. They know guys they've worked with, they're able to bring in. So it looks like Dennis Allen, if all reports are correct, is going to be that experienced defensive coordinator who'll be able to, run that defense and then leave Ben Johnson with an offense. And we look at what he's done with the Lions. He's really exciting. He obviously doesn't have those players in Chicago, but he does have exciting parts in Chicago. And for us, the most important thing is Caleb Williams. It now looks like the Bears have gone out, whether it works, whether it doesn't. It feels like the Bears have gone out and got the best guy out there on the market who can come in and work with this young quarterback. So we'll see how it pans out. But I think it's a great move by them, and I think it's exciting for now anyway.
Yeah, as you say, Noel, historically the Bears have hit pretty much every branch on the ugly tree. They've gone with the experienced guy who it turns out was past the sell-by date in John Fox. They went with the wild, out of left field choice in Mark Trestman, which is an absolute disaster. They went with Matt Nagy, who was OC in Kansas City, but obviously playing second fiddle there very much to Andy Reid. You bring in a guy who got no play calling experience, and to be fair, that was 2 playoff appearances before he got run out of town, and he was head coach of the year, so he was fooling a lot of other people too, and may at some point deserve a second chance. Who knows? Dan Quinn, who we'll talk to later in the program, is very good evidence of what can happen and how guys can learn lessons and apply them in a new city. But this time they've gone with the current vogue for the last really decade, which has been hire the hot young offensive mind of wunderkind who can light up the league and see how it goes. When it goes well, you got Kyle Shanahan, you got Sean McVay, you got Kevin O'Connell. And when it goes badly, a guy can flame out when it turns out that the step up to head coach is too much. But at least Chicago has gone with somebody who comes from a culture which is now a winning culture. He's seen that culture develop from the ground up, from very much a broken heart and broken city in Detroit and broken franchise to number 1 seed. We'll talk about what happened to them over the weekend, but I think a lot of people in Chicago will be happy to be marching down the Boulevard of Broken Dreams, as I was saying earlier on, if at least it meant they were playing meaningful football in January, which has been in very short supply in the Windy City of late. Anyway, let's get to cities that are actually hosting playoff games, including obviously Kansas City. All roads in the AFC run through Arrowhead this year. The Texans were the visitors over the weekend, Kieran, and like everyone else before them in the divisional round to face Patrick Mahomes, they went home defeated, but also maybe rightly unhappy with some of the things that went down. Patrick Mahomes, though, is now 7-0. He's never lost in the divisional round.
Yeah, and this has got a bit of an unnerving air of familiarity about it, hasn't it? You see the same pattern emerging. You see The Chiefs getting over the line very efficiently, very methodically, and once again, it was just the same old heads popping up to make the headlines. It was Mahomes, it was Kelsey, it was Steve Spagnuolo, and the defense. And you rightly said, look, the storylines of refs giving the Chiefs these calls, it doesn't end. I mean, look, in a way, you kind of want to get away from these narratives because it feels like it feels like almost saltiness or bitterness to be talking about, getting these calls from the referees, but it just keeps rearing its head. Some of those roughing the passer calls that were called on Patrick Mahomes. You heard Troy Aikman at one point. Troy Aikman, it was as if he was playing for the Texans. The way he reacted, he was disgusted with one of them. I think that was the one where the two defenders actually.
And the Troy Aikman intervention is kind of significant as well, isn't it? Because Troy is obviously 100% pro quarterback, and usually is the guy who's kind of saying, well, it's 50-50 or whatever. But even he was kind of throwing the notebook up in the air.
Yeah, and I thought it was refreshing, Joe. It was completely natural. It wasn't one of these professional responses. I think he just come on or something like that. That was the way he reacted. It was like any one of us sitting there watching it on TV. So look, that's one side of it, but the other side of it is Travis Kelce and Patrick Mahomes. And again, these names that I brought up. Travis Kelce, if you look at his day, he had 7 catches for 117 yards. Now, in the regular season, he averaged 51.4 yards.
I was going to say, Kieran, I'd say every mug who had Travis Kelce in their fantasy league team was throwing their phone at the television over the weekend, saying, "Where was that Travis Kelce in week 14 when it might have made a difference to me?"
Yeah, and his social media handle, I think it's Killer Trav or something cheesy like that. But he does live up to it when push comes to shove. He's playoff. What do they call Leonard Fournette? Playoff Lenny. He's playoff Trav at the moment. You have to give him credit. Go way back to the start of the season. I was on for Thursday Night Football, and we talked about was it more important that the Ravens got a win or the Chiefs? And I alluded to the down the road mentality for the Chiefs. They had no interest in putting up big numbers with Travis Kelce or feeding him the ball early on in the season. It's now is the time that he eats, and that's the way it's going to be until it's not. Like that, he is a huge part of the formula for success. They had a net rushing yards of 50. They had 76 positive yards and a few negative plays. They had 50 net yards. And besides Travis Kelce, they had 60 yards for the rest of the receiving core. So it was very simple, and it's not as if the day was too big for CJ Stroud or anything like that either. It was, CJ Stroud showed up. He was able to drive the ball down the field. They missed a couple of kicks in Kaimi Fairbairn, who has been reliable throughout the season. But again, it was Steve Spagnuolo dialing up the pressure. What was he sacked 8 times, nine tackles for loss. And I think it's worth mentioning with Steve Spagnuolo. I mentioned a couple of weeks ago as well. You look at Ben Johnson and you look at Aaron Glenn and all these. You call them hot commodities around the league, and as soon as they get their taste of success, they're going to be picked off. And I know that happened early in Steve Spagnuolo's career as well. After his Super Bowl success with the Giants, he left, I think, to be head coach for the Rams for a couple of years. But quickly reverted to type, and you see the success he's had down through the years. He's got 4 Super Bowls now as a defensive coordinator. He has stayed in his lane, and he is an absolute. He's as much of a key to the Chiefs' success as anybody else, and he deserves all the credit he can get.
And we talked about this this time last week, Kieran, about how when you look through the Chiefs, and again it was true at the weekend, they're outgained by 100 plus yards. Texans didn't even turn the ball over. They're the first team, in fact, to outgain their opponents by 100 plus yards, not turn the ball over and lose in the postseason. That's happened 50 times in playoff history, and the other 49 teams won their games. The Chiefs, 1 of 50 not to. But defensively, the Chiefs were not outstanding in any particular statistical category defensively. Like, their defense has been good according to the numbers, but it's the clutch moments. It's when they're in the red zone. It's when those potentially game-changing drives are happening that Spags firstly has the courage, and secondly has the schematic nous to get a free rusher through. He loves bringing those defensive backs. I think Reed went through a couple of times, and he constantly finds ways to surprise people and misdirect and get that takedown or get that hit on the quarterback when it's most needed.
Yeah, and you're right. It's I won't say bend, don't break, but it's when a team absolutely has to have a drive, that's when they dial up the pressure. And you saw them towards the end; they were just flooding through. And CJ Stroud, and we've remarked very frequently on this show about the weakness of the Texans' offensive line, and you just felt for CJ Stroud when they absolutely had to have a drive. That's when they were. The guys were pouring through, and it was George Karlaftis wasn't it, had the big day. He had 3 sacks on the night, but they were queuing up. They were absolutely queuing up when they had to have it. No turnovers, no strips, no fumbles, no interceptions. It was just pressure when it had to be, when they had to have it.
Brian, I wanted to talk to you about the Chiefs offense and Patrick Mahomes in particular, but as we touched on, and we don't want to spend ages talking about officiating controversy, it's been well ventilated, but there's one aspect of it, and you brought it up in the chat, and I thought it was kind of interesting because it was something that has been sitting in my head since a year ago when we talked about it first, which is this particular thing that Mahomes does. And I understand why he does it, right? Because all athletes at that level, all of the greats,
I know
look for every advantage that they can squeeze out of it, right? And they're ruthless competitors. But the thing that he does, because he knows he can get away with it, and he knows that the officials are going to side with him, and he can milk the 15-yard penalties out of it, the little pause when he's scrambling before he goes out of bounds, which sooner or later, as my dad used to say when he was teaching me to drive, if you run red lights, sooner or later you're going to meet yourself coming the other way. Patrick Mahomes, sooner or later, is going to come up against a defensive back or a linebacker, or come up against a defensive coordinator who says, when that happens, you light him up. I don't care if you take a 15-yard penalty. Send him to the blue tent and let's see if Carson Wentz can beat us. Not that I would ever advocate for a player being hurt, but he's towing a fine line here because he's trying to draw those penalties. But he's a runner and he's in bounds, and sooner or later, I'm telling you, he's going to get smoked.
See, I look at it different, Connor. I know I made that point, but I look at it in the sense of he's strategic in what he's doing, because I don't necessarily know what he wants to give up on the play.
He absolutely is, yeah.
We saw it last year, I think, against the 49ers, where he went down the line and it looked like he was going to drop off, go outside the perimeter, and the players held back because they assumed he was, and he ran out for another 20 yards. The one on Saturday where he got hit, I made the point on the group that he's strategic in the sense of everyone assumes he's going to run out of play, but he's thinking the bigger picture here, which is I can switch one back inside.
But he's not just looking at the bigger picture, Brian. The rules favor him, and he's taking advantage of the rules.
Yeah,
because he knows if a defender steps out of line, they're going to lose 15 yards anyway.
Yeah, true. Okay, and he's going down in a particular way where he knows ultimately 2 players come in on him or 1 conversion on him 9 times out of 10. Most quarterbacks in the league will get it. Okay, Mahomes probably gets his more of the share than others, but I also think he turns back inside because he feels there's a lane there, an opportunity to make those additional yards, which are crucial. We've seen over the course of the weekend in games, third and shorts, where teams, the Rams, 4-1 twice, couldn't get the first down. These extra yards are so critical, but I understand the nature where everyone is jumping on the issue around the refereeing at the weekend. It was quite poor, in particular in that game. There was other decisions over the course of the game. And I know where you're going with the Mahomes, but the Mahomes is cunning because even when he goes off the field, he's still getting those 15 yards. We saw in the championship game against the Bengals. He's still finding ways. And then what happens is the crowd converges on the referees, and the referees are put on the pressure, and immediately the flag comes out.
And it happens in every sport. I think people are a little bit myopic here. Like, I remember I spent 2 fine summers in Chicago in the 90s when the Chicago Bulls won the first and second of their second three-peats. And all opposing fans would talk about is Michael Jordan never gets called for travels. Jordan can do whatever he wants. The refs favor Jordan. It's the same with LeBron James. It was the same with the Dublin footballers when they were winning championships. It was the same with the Kilkenny hurlers. It happens.
You couldn't get a penalty in front of the cop in the 80s, and you couldn't get a penalty in the 90s at Old Trafford. That was the myth, and it was true to a certain extent, to a certain degree. And today I listened to a number of podcasts, and it was all around the officiating in that game. And because the NFL have a reduced schedule of games now, they actually are in a situation where they can. We've seen how many times over the course of the weekend in other games have we seen where the referees have called a decision and then quickly have said, we've been given the word from the officiating office that was incorrect, and we reversed the decision. They do that in the playoffs because there's less games to deal with. Why couldn't they do that situation on Saturday? It would have taken 30 seconds for someone to say, no, there was no flag on Mahomes. In fact, if there was any flag, it was a flag on the Texans for hitting each other. Twice the 2 players banged into each other as opposed to banging into Mahomes. But it's going to make for conversations all week, and it's certainly going to put more pressure on the officiating come Sunday, because now we're into a mammoth occasion in terms of the Bills, and it's starting to feel like that Peyton Manning, Tom Brady 10, 15 years ago, where they kept coming in loggerheads, and here we are again, Josh Allen against Patrick Mahomes.
Quick point on Spags before we move to Noel.
Yeah, I just wanted to say you're talking about how he dials it up and the scheme, but I also think there's a huge trust element that he knows exactly what to do and which players to trust. I recall listening to an interview. I think it was on a podcast actually after the Super Bowl last year, in which the third down play, in which the 49ers had an opportunity to get a fourth down, essentially would have killed the game. They would have kicked the game-winning field goal, and they blitzed. And he actually said on that particular play, he said to the safety, "I'll let you decide which one of the players you want to run with. I'll dial up to you. pick which one you want to go with." And again, he puts it back in the hands of the players, and we saw that on Saturday. Chris Jones and Kieran's very good at of his pronunciation of that Greek guy. I'll let him run with that again. But yeah, he's dialing up players. He trusts the players, and in those situations, he knows 9 times out of 10, those players are going to get the job done.
Karlaftis is the man you're looking for there. Noel, the Texans, a word on them, because they went down swinging. Noel has decided to exit the chat at just the least opportune moment. So I finished the point I was going to make. They went down. He
doesn't
swinging.
Like the Texans much, Connor.
They went down swinging. Stroud did all that he could. Noel, I was just bringing you in there to talk about the Texans, and CJ did everything he could. There's a couple of calls that they maybe would like back. There's a couple of kicks that they maybe would like back. But overall, you go to Arrowhead in the divisional round. Unfortunately, it's a very lonely furrow to plow. Nobody else has managed to figure out the key to unlocking that one. And the Texans are on the scrap heap, but not without honor for the second year in a row, where they leave having got a playoff win under their belt, but perhaps wondering how they might get to the next stage.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of started tough for them. We saw what happened on the kick return, and then the Boyd takes off the helmet and throws it on the ground, and straight away they put themselves at a disadvantage. The Chiefs end up into field goal position, and they go from there. Then we talked about just in terms of, Fairbairn misses some kicks, which kind of comes back. But for me, it really all, and Kieran talked about it, it's this offensive line that puts that young quarterback under so much pressure. And I mean, I had a lot of respect for him this weekend because he kept going, he kept trying to make plays, he kept scrambling. But as we got into the fourth quarter, and you talked about Spags, and it's like he let the dogs off, and they just went. It just felt like there was a wave coming at CJ Stroud, and at that point, there's only so much you can do. I mean, the Texans do have some good players there, and if they can get a couple of issues resolved, maybe they're a team that can go and kind of challenge. But when you're going into Arrowhead against a team like the Chiefs, who still haven't hit full form, but they know they do what they need to do to win. And I think when you're a Texans team, you can't have your quarterback exposed like that. I mean, 8 sacks, he was just constantly under pressure. Then I mentioned, special teams, if that's going wrong, you're putting yourself behind the 8 ball. I mean, on defense, they have some good players. You look at Donnell Hunter and Will Anderson Jr. Those are guys that can really cause problems, and they did, and they look really good. But, when you go to the Chiefs, everything has to be clicking. And this Texans team all season was, at times, it felt like it was limping along. And what we always talked about was this offensive line. And for me, when it's as bad as this, like, it's not even the line, it's Schultz at tight end and your running backs. Even when they're being brought in to help protection, it's just not helping. And from there on, it's just so difficult for a team. They've done so well to get to the playoffs, but to go to the Chiefs and to try and win with that is a big problem. And it was showing up again. And if they can do some work on the O-line next season, they're in a division where they could end up back winning it and into the playoffs again. And maybe they can work from there, but they do have to work on that kind of going forward.
Yeah, and I tell you, as we saw last season as well, the Chiefs past masters at letting you beat yourself. They took advantage of every single mistake that their opponents made in the postseason last year and ended up going to the Lombardi, not without plenty of skill on their own behalf too, it should be mentioned. But a team, as you mentioned, Noel, a quarterback who was running for his life at the weekend, a quarterback who wasn't sacked at all was Jaden Daniels, Brian, who led the Commanders to a famous victory over the Lions. And I have to hold my hands up here like a lot of people. Not only did I say that the Lions were going to win this game, I said they were going to comfortably cover the spread. I said they were going to rinse Commanders, lit up, whatever superlative you want to use. I was throwing it in there. I was cranking out the hyperbole. And I reckoned without both Jaden Daniels, without the Washington defense, we can talk about the Lions and what they did or didn't do, but this really should all be at the start about Jaden Daniels and Dan Quinn and Cliff Kingsbury and the entire coaching and playing staff in Washington, who I hate this expression. We talked about this last year. I remember when people were talking about the Bengals, and I was saying I hate the expression playing with house money. Like, you never know how big or how small the window is until after the fact. The time to win is now, and the Commanders seem to have bought into that gospel. They're not playing. They're not there to take part. They weren't looking at this as a free shot. This looks like a team that actually believes it can win the Super Bowl, and so they should.
Yeah, and I wonder if the Lions buy into their own hype to a certain extent. One seed, big win against the Vikings in the nature of that performance, and well, certainly weren't complacent. There was, I said what we did say on the show on Thursday. And in fairness, kind of, I acknowledge that you put this out there. They're going to have to score in the 30s to win this game, and we didn't believe that they could continue to live up with this Lions juggernaut of an offense. But there were so many key moments in this game. It was a weird game in many ways because it was the Lions were 7-3. They're driving. They're moving the ball very well. They're in the red zone. Huge turnover, and it's a 7-point swing or a 14-point swing in many ways because that would have went to 14-3 if they had a punch that in. You have the Commanders then drive immediately there with Brian Robinson touchdown. You've got the Goff situation in terms of Goff has turned the ball over once. He then throws the interception. They start getting aggressive. I said on Thursday, if you look at the model of the Bills game, when the Bills went in and put 48 points up on them, that they got up early and they made the Lions chase the game. And when Goff has to chase games, he makes mistakes. He's aggressive with the ball. He's going to go for the big pass. He was going for the big pass on the interception, which led to a pick six. I think we'll get into the hit on him, which I thought was outrageous.
I think you raise a really good point because we talked about Josh Allen in the Broncos game, and we talked about maturity last week and how Bo Nix comes out slinging, throws the big touchdown pass to Troy Franklin. Bills are immediately on the back foot in the game that they were expected to dominate. But Josh Allen doesn't come out looking to slice and dice. He doesn't come out looking to match Bo Nix. He sticks to the process and they work their way back into the game. And that's something that the Lions didn't seem to be able to accept because when you're behind by 2 scores, you can't get level on one drive, but you could lose the game on one drive if you're not careful because you cannot go down 3 scores. And they made the cardinal sin, as you say. They forced it. They chased their losses and it blew up in their face.
I think the one that was more disappointing for me, not necessarily the interception, because interceptions happened. It's the one before halftime. They're down by 10 points at that stage. And
they're in field goal range.
In field goal range, worst case scenario, you take a field goal, you go in at halftime down by a touchdown. And sometimes it gets into your head. There's like this mindset.
And as it happens, after halftime, they come out, they get the stop, and they score a touchdown. They would have been level.
But is that not on the coaching and not necessarily on your new head coach? But just be careful there what I say about Ben Johnson. But no, like isn't that Dan Campbell has an aggressive manner about how he coaches a game, and some people love it, some people respect it, some people have a little bit, Sometimes it comes back to bite you. For me, it bit him last year in the championship game. I thought there was more strategic plays to be made in terms of kicking field goals, and the same scenario there on Saturday before halftime. Take the field goal, don't go for the big play continuously. And then there were some plays in the second half, which again were bananas. The reverse flicker, whatever you want to call it, where Williams ends up throwing it. Like that's a bananas situation. Throw the ball out of bounds.
The Bears did that a couple of weeks ago, and people were laughing at them when Keenan Allen threw an interception. Like I don't understand why you dial up that play. It was completely unnecessary, and you knew from the moment it was in his hands, oh, this is only going to end one way.
Yeah, there was too many mistakes. There were a mistake-riddled team on Saturday. Even in the final drive, summed it up. He chose an interception. Now, there's a lot of conversations today around the hit on Jared Goff, which would have resulted in the touchdown not being awarded in terms of the run back for the pick six. It would have been a penalty. Still would have maintained the ball and potentially scored, but now there's a suggestion that once Jared Goff went into the blue tent and he was cleared to go back in, we've seen quarterbacks cleared to go back in time and time again. Doesn't necessarily mean they're not dealing with a concussion because his play in the second half was so erratic. People are suggesting he shouldn't have been cleared to go back in. That's probably for another conversation. And I don't want to get away from the Commanders because it was a fantastic performance. They put up 45 points in the game. Jaden Daniels was lights out throughout the course of the game. Nothing seems to unravel in terms of there's no pressure points in the game. Even when they hit third downs, he doesn't seem to panic. He's got players around that are elevating to a new level. We spoke before about Mahomes and Josh Allen and other players coming to play. They're all buying into, and as much as Brady got questioned for his commentary on the game, he made one point that stuck in my head. You can have 100 things wrong with your organization, but a quarterback can make everything right. And that's essentially what's happened to the Commanders. 4 wins last year, and here they are 1 game away from being in the Super Bowl.
Kieran, talk to us as well about that Commanders defense, because it's not necessarily a unit that's chock-a-block with stars in comparison to, say, the Ravens or the Bills, if you're to look at them on that side of the ball. Dan Quinn has had to kind of beg, borrow, and steal to put those pieces together. The likes of Bobby Wagner, Frankie Louvu, are anchoring that unit. But they did as much as they needed to do against the hottest offense in the NFL. They put them in difficult spots. They stood up strong when they needed to, and they got where they needed to go.
Yeah, and I think in 3 of the 4 games, am I right in saying it's the team that won the turnover battle came out the winning side of it, and it was as simple as that, really. I mean, this was a very, very close game, bar the turnovers. And I know you mentioned that some of it was self-inflicted, but at the same time, you have to have the guys in the right place at the right time, and they came ready to play. You're talking about pronunciations. I'm going to try here. Mike's Sanderson with 2 picks.
Yeah, Mikey Sanderson, who undercut the pass that should never have been thrown, but undercut the route brilliantly. Yeah.
And you had Quan Martin with a pick 6. So I mean, they were, as I say, they came ready to play. They did all they had to do. And again, go back to the front office. Go back to Noel's interview last week. You have to give them credit. Bringing in that pedigree, bringing in a Bobby Wagner, that can't be bad for any locker room. And having the right voices in the room. Look at Zach Ertz on the other side of the ball and what he's been able to produce, especially in the last couple of weeks, as well as the stakes have ramped up. He's started to show up, and you can see, you hear him in interviews after the game. He's banged up. He's not 100% fit. He's hurting after every game, but he's got that toughness about him. He's got that pedigree. He's got he's got his trip to the Super Bowl and his Super Bowl ring in his pocket as well. So like those kind of things are invaluable for a team. And just like going back to Jayden Daniels as you were alluding to, I think it's such a, it's not a lucky break. I mean, they've struck gold in Jayden Daniels here in Washington, and I saw a video today or yesterday where it was a flashback to February where Dan Orlovsky was evaluating talent for the draft, and he was actually saying he would have gone in for Jayden Daniels over Caleb Williams, and he talked about peace in the pocket, and it's PEACE. He just talked about how he was able to remain on an even keel in all situations, so comfortable in the pocket. And look, he looks like a guy that's really ready to break through. And you have to say it's one of the greatest rookie seasons that we've seen. I mean, you don't have to go back too far to the last time that a rookie quarterback made a conference championship in Brock Purdy, but I mean, the debate started then and there whether Brock Purdy was the reason or whether he was there by circumstance. Nobody is debating who's the main guy responsible for the Commanders' success this year. It's all about Jayden Daniels, and you hear interviews with players and how comfortable they are with him in the locker room, and how they feed off his energy. And it just seems to be so, I don't want to use the word zen, but everyone seems to be consistent in that he's unflappable. And with a guy like that, you just don't know where the limit is. You say, you're right. You can talk about house money all you want, but they're 2 games away now from winning it all, and why wouldn't they think they can do it?
No, we rightly place a lot of the plaudits on Jayden Daniels, who's doing things that you just don't see rookie quarterbacks this side of Tom Brady do. But a word for Dan Quinn, who, like a lot of head coaches, when something goes wrong, became a scapegoat for the infamous 28-3 choke job when he was head coach of the Falcons. As much as that's a brilliant comeback by the Patriots, Quinn gets hung with you weren't aggressive enough, you didn't go for it, you're too conservative, and that's why you didn't deserve to win a Super Bowl, which is very, very harsh. And then he gets replaced by Kyle Shanahan, goes into the wilderness, rebuilds his career, and now he's completely turned around. No more than Dan Campbell did in Detroit, a previously, snake bit franchise, albeit with the addition of the franchise quarterback who, as Brian rightly pointed out, kind of can change everything, even if a lot of other things are wrong. But Dan Quinn deserved massive, massive credit here for a guy who almost became the butt of jokes for 28-3. This is his redemption arc now, and it's in full swing.
Absolutely. And it's interesting we talk about Ben Johnson tonight, because we look at this, last year and what could have been when he was on the plane and there was talk with the Commanders, and for whatever reason he decided against the job. They go out and they get an experienced head coach in Dan Quinn, and what a difference a year makes when we look at this team now. talked about the guys they brought in. Obviously, Kieran mentioned Zach Ertz, and we look as well at, they have Austin Eckler. Apologies, I'm thinking of Eckler there. And you mentioned the guys on defense of Wagner and Luvu. They bring in Biadish there at center, and they just bring a lot of dependable, experienced players into this team who can kind of help boost the experience level. And you bring in an experienced head coach who's working with these guys, and that's what sets up a young rookie quarterback. That's what puts him on a great platform, is the kind of experience you put around him. And then you talk about Dan Quinn and what a season he's had. I mean, Dan Campbell, is a good comparison, because you talk about, chances that Dan Campbell's make. When we look at what they've done on fourth down with Quinn, I think they were they 3 or 4 attempts on fourth down. So that's a head coach who isn't holding back. He's going for it. But again, it's the experience he brings. It's that pedigree you mentioned, the loss they had before, and how he can develop from that and how he learns from that. And he's brought it into this team. And it's amazing. I thought I liked every move they made in preseason. I thought this team was on to start that road back again, but I never saw them doing what they're doing now. And to see what they've done, I mean, I'm like you. I thought this game against the Lions was a great fairy tale. They'd gone as far as they'd gone, and they were going to have a really, really bad night. But, they have that there. They've stepped up, and they're playing for this head coach. And like you guys say, this team can go anywhere.
As Brian points out in our internal chat there as well, playing for their offensive coordinator, Cliff Kingsbury, who was a guy who was laughed out of town in Arizona, and now whose career is very much resurgent and is getting head coaching buzz, and rightly so, for what he's been able to do for Jayden Daniels over this past season. We'll see if he goes or whether he stays. A lot might depend on what happens in the next couple of weeks. It's 2 games down now, 2 more to go. Let's move on now to Rams versus Eagles at Lincoln Financial Field. Every playoff has at least one snow game, and this was very much in that category. First half, just cold. Second half, the flurries of snow coming down, Kieran, and adding that picturesque quality, but also making conditions treacherous. It's a team that manages the conditions best that generally wins these games, by which I mean the team that hangs on to the ball. Unfortunately, the Rams, not quite on the level as the Lions, as we were talking about, but there's a couple of plays that where they didn't help themselves, and where the Eagles, as they did in their previous game, were able to take advantage. This is a Philly team, though, that finds itself in the championship game really without hitting its straps, and they're a bit of a curiosity, because Saquon is the only guy, Saquon on the defense, I should say, are the standouts here. We haven't really seen any fireworks from them, and yet they find themselves in the championship game.
Yeah, I mean, you're looking at another team who's look, they're not on the same level as the Chiefs, but they are finding ways to win games. And you mentioned Saquon Barkley. Like, interestingly, the conditions you mentioned as the game was getting worse, and the Rams, you had a sense that the Rams were trying to hang in there. Their defense was really keeping them in it, and they couldn't get things going on offense. You were thinking, okay, they need to hang in there. This game isn't over. And as the snow started to fall, I was foolish in thinking that's going to help the Rams, because Saquon's not going to be able to cut the way he usually does. He's going to need to hesitate at that little bit more, and they're going to be able to prevent him from breaking off one of these big runs. And lo and behold, what a fool I look like! Next thing I know, he's up on 200 yards.
You're not listening to Melissa Stark in the broadcast. She'd spoken to Saquon about this. He consulted all the oracles. He spoke to LeSean McCoy. He spoke to Marshall Falk. He spoke to all the greats from the snow games past. He knew what cleats to wear. He spoke to the equipment manager. Saquon had it down.
But you saw last week when they were asking Saquon, why did he why did he take a knee when he was going through for a touchdown against the Packers? He talked about the analytics and the reasons behind it. You can see that this is a guy that leaves absolutely no stone unturned. And if there's anything that will give him an edge, he's going to take full advantage. But you're right. I mean, your two. I think they're two leading receivers. The Eagles were Goddard and Saquon again. So like AJ Brown, really a feature. Devontae Smith wasn't really a feature. And I know we've spoken about that at length. And we're blue in the face from talking about whether they need to get a passing game going. But at some point, you're going to need it. You're going to have it. And you'd wonder again if anything happens to Saquon, if anyone can stop him, and if some team does manage to dare Jalen Hurts to go long or to win it through the air. The Packers weren't able to do it. The Rams now weren't able to do it. So it'd be interesting to see if the Commanders can put a stop to Saquon and sell out to stop the run and to see if they can win it through the air. But look, they did what they had to do. They're in the divisional championship again. I talked about the air of inevitability. It seems to be trending towards an Eagles Chiefs Super Bowl. I'm not saying that's going to be the case, but they're on the right path.
No, the Rams defensively really stepped up against what is, and it's hard to overstate this, just the most intimidating offensive line. Like, they were getting thrown around in the first half, and you see what the likes of Jordan Mailata are able to do. And I can't remember, who's the 6'7" right guard. He's an absolute monster, just throwing people out of the way. I saw Christian Rosebroom just get flung on the turf at one point. It's ridiculous. And yet, they found ways to get through. They found ways to get to Jalen Hurts. And we're talking about the Eagles marching on, the Eagles playing relatively mistake-free football. And yet, at the end of the day, the Rams have a drive to win it and are not that far away from sending the Eagles home.
Yeah, I mean, at one point it looked like it was the Eagles' game, and then, the Rams, I know you mentioned defense, but on offense, they kind of got that no huddle, kind of quick offense going that seemed to really cause the Eagles problems. But this Rams defense has got better and better as the year has gone on. It's a young defense, but obviously, like, there are a number of really good players there. But Jared Verse, we know he had a few words to say before the game, which kind of seemed to rile up Eagles fans. Yeah. But he went out there, and from his point of view, he backed things up. He got a couple of sacks and. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, to underline your point is all I was going to do, Noel. If you're going to talk the talk, you better walk the walk, and he absolutely did that.
That's a Roy Keane mantra there. Yeah, as long as you back it up, you're okay in his books.
Well, yeah, and look, this Rams defense has really been getting more impressive as the season's gone on. I mean, Kieran mentioned it earlier. They were doing a good job holding the Eagles back. Now, the Eagles were getting field goals, but still the Rams were kind of slowing them down and stopping them from getting those touchdowns. And as you say, at the end of the game, then it almost turns the other way. A couple of mistakes on the offensive line for the Rams knocks them back and really kills them. But this is a Rams defense that definitely has potential to keep going into the future, and it'll be interesting again if what they can do next season. But against a tough Eagles team, I think they showed themselves well, and the Rams team were just a little too short.
No, maybe it's the scars of Cody Parkey and the double doink that still haven't yet healed. But one of the things I always watch in the postseason is teams that have kickers that are on song and teams that have kickers that are having a bit of trouble. Elliott looks like a guy that I don't particularly want to be standing over the potentially game-winning or game-tying kick in a conference game or in a Super Bowl. He just doesn't look quite like you can trust him right now.
No, he doesn't. And look, when you get into this stage of the season now, this is when things like this really get showing up. If your kicker is having a tough time, missing extra points, this is when it really shows. And those points, 1 or 2 points, always,
decided the Super Bowl last year. One black kick was the difference.
Absolutely. When you get into the playoffs, it's fine margins, and we've seen this in games. And this is something teams really do need to worry about now, because it feels like more than ever, if a kicker is on form, he can hit them from 40, 50, 55. But when kickers go off form, they really can cause a team. They are a crutch for a team, and they can cause a problem. So that is something that the Eagles would need to kind of keep an eye on going forward, although there's only potentially 2 games left, one anyway. So, they're not going to be changing anything now. But yeah, absolutely. It's something to keep an eye on, because it's something that if it goes wrong, fine margins can cost the team everything now in the knockout stages.
Brian, we'll talk about the Rams defense in a second, but one thing that I wanted to touch on is Eagles offensive coordinator, Kellen Moore. Like, I do not know what he was doing towards the end of that game. Like, it bordered on reckless what he's doing. Like, you have a quarterback who's been rocked, who's carrying a knee injury that's severely limiting his mobility. You have a running back who looks like he could run for 400 yards if you let him. And you're making Jalen Hurts drop back and pass the ball when you have the option to run it, and you're putting him in jeopardy against a Rams pass rush that is really hitting stride. I mean, they could have been without their quarterback for the conference championship game because of Kellen Moore's play calling. It's reckless stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. First, Jalen Hurts, before I go into he clearly was, I wouldn't say drugged up to his eyeballs. Maybe that's a bit harsh, but he was certainly banged up on certain things, because his press conference after, where he had to restrain himself from some of the wording he was going to use, looked like a guy that was purely on adrenaline and whatever they were tapping into him before he went back out there. It'd be interesting to see how he can react to that over the course of the week, and how fit he is come Sunday. Yeah, Kellen Moore didn't do himself any favours, and there was a situation in the game where earlier in the previous show where they were trying to establish if you could throw the ball, and he seemed more comfortable going out one side of the perimeter as opposed to the other. And therefore, you think if they are going to call a fake handoff and look for Goddard to pull back 5 or 6 yards, it's the other side where he was more comfortable. But then they wide him out left, and what did they do? Was 12 yards on that particular play.
Yeah.
And again, as you said, a scenario where they could potentially lose their quarterback. But not so much for that game, but even going into next week's game. So it was a strange move. But Kellen Moore is a hot commodity again to be a head coach, which I'm finding quite surprising, because I didn't think he did his quarter. He hasn't done his quarterback over the course of the season a lot. Like, Hurts isn't the quarterback which we saw 2 years ago going to the Super Bowl, and he was struggling for large parts of last year. And obviously they tried to turn it around this year with different offensive coordinator. Maybe it is a quarterback situation.
Kind of laughing to myself, thinking it was almost as though Kellen Moore decided between Jalen Hurts and Saquon Barkley, Jalen Hurts is the more expendable. I'll put him in harm's way because we can't win without Saquon Barkley. It was bizarre.
Yeah, and you saw the play in the touchdown that Kieran alluded to. Obviously, he said breaking off the big play, but he said, I got this. Give me the ball. I'll deal with this. I'll get us over the line in this game and get us to victory. But that is, again, down to the mindset of a quality running back and a quality addition to this team over the course of the season. You would think, run the ball effectively, and not necessarily even run the ball effectively where you get the first down. Just put yourself in a manageable situation on a punt if it needs be. And I thought the Rams, I don't want to flip it, sorry, we haven't really spoke too much about the Rams offense, but there was a time where they continuously dropped back and third and long, and I felt because the Rams defense was playing so well, would it not be more prudent to actually just run the ball and put them deep, put them in a situation where Hurts is having to scramble on yards, and maybe he causes the turnover, and that kind of comes me to the Rams defense, Connor, because as well as they played, they didn't turn over the ball. That's the situation. And ultimately, that was the killer, because whilst the Eagles turned the ball over, people say, oh, well, they didn't score touchdowns. They were tagging on field goals. And in a game like that, where there's not going to be a lot of touchdowns on the scoreboard, those field goals were crucial. And Elliott made those field goals at critical times. 2 turnovers in the second half. And the Rams defense never turned the ball over. And ultimately, that's probably the big kind of disappointing piece. As well as they played, they couldn't turn the ball over. And that's why they're at home and the Eagles are moving on. And Connor is gone.
He's back there now.
There we go.
Sorry, Brian, I lost you there.
We all lost you. You're grand. I was just making the point, Connor, around the defense and the fact that, like, turnovers, we spoke earlier on, turnovers over the course of the weekend were crucial in every game, and I know we're going to come to the Bills game. And the Rams didn't get a turnover, and ultimately for me, that's what cost them in the end, because the Eagles got those turnovers, got the field goals off those turnovers, which were huge points. They got 6 points off turnovers, and they won the game by 6 points. So there you go.
Yeah, no, and that seems as good a point as any to move to Orchard Park and to talk about the Ravens against the Bills. And this is just, we talked about how big a deal this game was, because for both Lamar Jackson and for Josh Allen, they have this millstone around their neck, and they still will, and Josh Allen still will, unless he can get over Patrick Mahomes this coming weekend. That for all the great play that they've shown and all the MVP talk, that they can't get to the top of the mountain. And particularly from a Baltimore perspective, this team was built to win. It was built to win last year. It was even more built to win if that's the case this year. We spoke at length about the addition of Derrick Henry and what that was doing to them. We spoke about how well this roster is constructed, how balanced it is, the play calling of Todd Monken offensively and what that's done for them, and how it's been the making of Lamar Jackson's maturing as a passer over the past couple of years, and how they had everything that they needed, and they still have everything they need, except the ball, crucially, to stay in their hands at critical times in that game. And as Brian was talking about, there's not only turnovers to talk about in this game, but dropped balls, and it absolutely killed them. They fall 2 points short, but they might as well have lost by 50. You just got to hold on to the football.
Sorry, is that to me there, was it?
That was to you, no, sorry.
Oh, apologies. Yeah, I mean, what a game. I mean, 2 teams. Obviously, we talked about the 2 quarterbacks who, there was kind of a head-to-head between those as well. and it finishes tight. It finishes with the Mark Andrews drop, and it's just unlucky because you look at what the Ravens did. We've a poor interception by Lamar, which people are going to talk about now. Is this Lamar Jackson in the playoffs? Is this what he does? We have a fumble. There was a bad snap and a fumble, and then you have someone like Mr. Reliable, like Mark Andrews, who, he has a fumble during the game and late in the fourth quarter. Then he drops the 2-point conversion, and that's how close this game was for the Ravens. They really put it up to the Bills, but one thing that kind of came up a lot about the Bills over the season that we talked about in different shows was the fact that they led the league in the turnover battle, and that's where they won it again this week. They didn't put up massive stats. Josh Allen, he gets 2 touchdowns on the ground. He shows that hulking, strong body that can drive through people on the goal line. He didn't really put up big stats in the air. I think it's about 127 yards and no touchdowns. So, the Bills kind of did what they had to do. But this Ravens team, unfortunately, it's the turnover battle between these two giants that really let this Ravens team down. And you said it, like, I like this Ravens team from top to bottom. I like the way it's built. I think they have the players. I felt they were going to win this weekend because, for me, I feel Josh Allen is what drives this Bills team. He has good players there, but I think he is what really ultimately drives it. Whereas on the flip side, I think this Ravens team aren't as good without Lamar Jackson, but I think they're a better team if you take both quarterbacks out. And I thought that would be enough to kind of go. But this weekend, as I say, the Ravens did what they needed to do, or the Bills did what they needed to do, and the Ravens turned the ball over. And that's where this kind of head-to-head matchup went wrong for me.
Kieran, I know we wouldn't be in business if we all didn't pile in and buy into the different narratives that go around football, and this is the bit that we enjoy the most. But at the same time, part of this Lamar Jackson playoff thing is just pure bullshit. I have to be honest in my mind, because if you look at his stats, they're actually better than Peyton Manning's were at this Peyton Manning stage of his career. Now, the flip side of that is, unfortunately, the reason why we can look back at the Peyton Manning thing and laugh is because Peyton Manning went on to win 2 Super Bowls. And unfortunately for Lamar Jackson, because of how good he is, and this is how rarefied the air gets at the top of the mountain, till you get that ring, everything gets second guessed.
Yeah, you talk about the mountain, and I have a couple of things that just pegged down in my notes here. Like, you guys are watching this sport a lot longer than I am. Getting to know you, you're going back a couple of decades before me. I got into this game.
Surprisingly old, Kieran. I know the filter probably doesn't show it.
Not even. And to be fair, I became a fan late enough in the game. But one thing that drew me into this sport was just the fascination with history and with legacy and with the archives and with the obsession. And I suppose it's true to say in every sport there's an obsession with putting people in their right place, or giving them the right place in history, and giving teams the right place in history. And you could break down the Super Bowl era into decades. And if you go back in every era or in every decade, and I'm not saying era, that's not a Taylor Swift comment or anything like that, but in every decade you've got the top of the pile, and then you've got, I'm reminded of a Mark Wahlberg and Will Ferrell film, The Other Guys. The really good quarterbacks who kind of get squeezed out of history a little bit. And I'm thinking of a few that I've learned about it, going back through the archives. Like Danny White replaced Roger Staubach in the late 70s, and he went to 4 straight conference championships in a row. And he doesn't get spoken about. If you talk about the 80s, you talk about Joe Montana, John Elway. Very few people will initially mention Dan Fouts, whose statistics and yearly regular season stats were off the charts. You go to the 90s, and the only thing Drew Bledsoe is really known for is getting injured to make way for Tom Brady in the 2000s. But he was one of the most talented quarterbacks through the decade in the 90s. And I'm thinking about Lamar Jackson, and I'm thinking about Josh Allen and Joe Burrow. And it's funny, even though this game this past weekend was so hotly anticipated and we couldn't wait for it, there was almost a little bit of disappointment in me, because I said, we know no matter what happens in this game, one of these great quarterbacks is going back to the bottom of the mountain. We talk about the top of it, and every time you go back down, you have to climb that bit harder to get all the way back up again. And you look at a team like the Ravens that were so perfectly constructed to go and win the Super Bowl this year. The fact of the matter is that in all of these years, there aren't enough Super Bowl rings to go around. There aren't enough championships to go around. And you just feel like...
the scary thing, Kieran, sorry, as you mentioned it, but the scary thing for me is, all right, you can talk about how it's a long off season now for the Ravens, and with everything seemingly going in their favor, they still couldn't get it done. what about all the rest of the teams in the AFC? Because it's, you're looking up at the Chiefs and the Ravens and the Bills. And, let's not even mention the fact that the Bengals didn't make the playoff because they kind of wet the bed in the early parts of the season before they came steamrolling home just too late. That's a lot of playoff spots already gone before you start constructing your roster. And you're looking at a team that has Lamar Jackson and Derrick Henry and Roquan Smith and Patrick Queen and Madubuike and all these guys and Humphreys and all the rest of it. And they still can't get past the divisional round in the AFC. You might as well give up and go home.
And like every time you get knocked off, and especially in this sport as well, in other sports, continuity is I suppose, more a guarantee, because you look at salary caps and you look at rosters, you look at injuries, coaching changes, all these variables are going to change now in the off season, and we can't be sure that the Ravens that we had this year are going to be the Ravens that we see next season. So there are just this, look, Dan Marino would attest to the fact that just because you get there once, it doesn't mean it's going to be the same case every single year. And as I said, the boys are back down at the bottom of the hill. Your Joe Burrows, Justin Herberts, Lamar Jackson's, all generational talents in their own right, and we talk about them a lot. They're fresh in mind now, but I just wonder in 20 years' time which one of them is going to be kind of squeezed out of the top tier, and who's going to become one of the other guys. Because you look at Jaden Daniels, you look at Caleb Williams, someone is going to break through again and maybe get to the top of the mountain in this decade. But this decade well and truly belongs to Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs, and I just wonder who's going to, as I said, the boys are gone home now. Josh Allen has the chance again. He's still alive, and he can squeeze up to the top of the mountain and I suppose etch his name in history. And with Super Bowl fans, it's all about Canton. It's all about Hall of Fame. It's just something that's intrigued me in the last couple of weeks. I've been thinking about it. It's unfair. There should be space for all of them at this tier, but you just get a sense that someone's going to be forgotten in time to come, and it's a pity, and you hope it's not Lamar or one of these great quarterbacks.
I hope I'm not spoiling it for anyone who hasn't seen that movie, but the other guys did actually solve that case in the end. So sometimes the other guys do actually win. Brian, let's talk, and we should talk, and we need to spend more time talking about the Buffalo Bills here, because they did get it done, and they do advance to the Arrowhead Invitational, where they'll take on the Chiefs, and they'll have one more turn to see can they actually get that monkey off their back. And they did it by playing mistake-free football, which sometimes is what the playoffs demand that you do. It's not always about the fireworks. We talked about the Chiefs in that regard. The Bills seem to have learned that lesson. You don't need all the time the Josh Allen superhero cape. It's nice, though, when it's called upon that it's there.
Yeah, they had a number of, say, bigger plays in the first half, but over the course of the 4 quarters, they didn't have a stellar game on offense. As I said, it wasn't a mistake-riddled performance. Nothing there whatsoever. But there was no big plays. Nothing really jumped out. In the second half, they got Cook going. It was a reliable game. It was like as if they were holding Cook back, because they leaned very much on Davis in the first half and Josh Allen with his legs to a certain extent in the red zone in particular. And then the second half, they got cooking, shall we say. But I said on the show Thursday, having had that podcast with Matt Perino, I was on the Ravens all week, and he convinced me. He convinced me that this, and no one's alluded to the turnovers by the Bills defense. He said this Bills defense will come to play on Sunday, and they'll make plays and they'll get turnovers, and they did.
I do think that's really interesting, Brian, and it's the one thing that actually both I love about the Bills defense and slightly concerns me about the championship game and the Super Bowl should they get there. You can't rely on that every week, like the fundamentals. Like, and the thing about the Chiefs is, they didn't have to force a turnover from the Texans. They did what they needed to do, because you can't rely on interceptions and fumbles. Like even like a couple of the ones that went their way, ball gets punched out, doesn't always fall your way. Ball doesn't always come out. You saw, I think it was who was Justice Hill trying to punch the ball out of Von Miller's hand, and he got a great contact on the ball, but it just doesn't move. Sometimes it falls for you, sometimes it doesn't fall for you, and you can't rely on the turnover differential to get you home.
No, but I still felt over the course of the game which quarterback was more unsettled. It was certainly Lamar, even not necessarily with turnovers, but he was under pressure. He was scrambling at times, and obviously he's a very good scrambler. You put him out on the perimeter, but they held up their own in the first half in terms of the run game. Derrick Henry's numbers were very low, but what I found a bit strange was they were leaning more on Justice Hill in the first half as opposed to using Derrick Henry, which made no sense. And in the second half, when they finally got Henry into the game, they were starting to move up a gear. But I felt over the course of the game, you look at the run numbers today for the Ravens, it's quite low compared to other games. So I thought they held their end of the bargain. I know what you're saying around turnovers. It doesn't necessarily mean that this is going to be the same case come this weekend. And we're only a few weeks removed from where they gave up huge numbers in Detroit and they gave up huge numbers in LA. So I know they're prone to giving up these big plays, but I felt last night in particular they did enough. But Josh Allen was really complimenting their defense after the game, which I was a little bit surprised by because they just gave up a huge drive. They did allow the Ravens to go and score, and if it wasn't for Mark Andrews dropping a mirror image of the play in which he dropped in Pittsburgh a couple of years ago, similar scenario, 2-point conversion, they would have got the game into overtime. So you're right. Over the course of the game, they play well, but there's flaws there. And obviously the Chiefs will be homing in that over the course of the next week. And the Chiefs have a point to prove, despite the fact that they're one seed, the game's at home, they have lost to the Bills this season. They are the team that essentially stopped them from going unbeaten, because if they were unbeaten, there would have been a different team on the field come that last game in Denver. So they will have that in the back of their minds as well.
Well, let's have a look at the games for the weekend then. We've dealt with what's just gone past in the divisional round. In the conference championship games now, we have Washington visiting Philadelphia. That's Sunday game at 8 o'clock. In Kansas City, meanwhile, Buffalo take on the Chiefs at Arrowhead at 11:30. Just want to take time to mention, if you look at the stunning visuals, if you're watching us on YouTube, Craig Rigdon, who sits away in the background and does sterling work on all our visual content. Craig's been with us since the start of the 2023 season. God love him. He's a Giants fan as well. So you can see the well of pain from which his creativity springs, and just why these visuals are a joy to behold. But Craig adds just a huge amount to the Irish NFL show. He's just cranking out the screens for the picks, the video content at the start, the video content that breaks up the podcast and breaks up the live show, and so many of the elements that keep us looking professional and keep the whole thing looking great and sounding great. And look, thanks to Craig, who we don't always put his name up in lights, but we probably should do more often, and we really appreciate the work that he does. It adds a huge amount to what we do on the Irish NFL show, and fair play to Craig. He better be listening, better be watching his own handiwork. Yeah, looking forward to the Super Bowl visuals as well when the lads are over in New Orleans, and no doubt Craig will be in the lab working and cooking up some nice stuff for Super Bowl 59, as indeed will the four teams that still have hopes of being there: the Commanders, the Eagles, the Chiefs, and the Bills. We're really looking forward to breaking down those games on Thursday. We've plenty more content though to come to you on the Irish NFL show between now and then. Stay with us.